Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If you want to improve your playing, join me and thousands of other pickers getting better every day at pegheadnation.com. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Bluegrass Jam Along, which is not just another episode of Bluegrass Jam Along. This happens to be the 400th episode of the podcast. That's a lot of episodes. Wow. Just first off, just want to say what a cool thing it's been to do those episodes. What a huge amount of fun I've had. What a bunch of incredible people I've been able to talk to, and just how amazing it has been. Thank you to all of them. Thank you to all of you for listening. It's, such a cool thing to get to do this. And I wanted to do something fun for the 400th episode, and I have. This is going to be me chatting with Chris Eldridge of Punch Brothers and Mighty Poplar about one of his favourite records, and I'm sure one of your favourite records too, Bela Fleck's Drive album. It's a great record, and I know that Chris loves it. And so I really enjoy having a conversation with somebody about somebody else's music rather than their own sometimes. I think you get a different kind of chat. I think people go a bit in a different direction, and it can be really cool. So you're going to hear me and Chris Eldridge chat about Bela Fleck's Drive. I hope you enjoy this. I really enjoyed putting this together, as I've enjoyed putting together all the other episodes, and I'm sure we'll enjoy all the ones to come. It's been a blast so far, and I'm going to keep going. So thank you for listening so far. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you enjoy this chat with Chris Eldridge. My guest on Bluegrass Jam Along this week is Chris Eldridge, who all of you will know and love as a member of Punch Brothers and now a member of Mighty Poplar, and he is here to talk about neither of those things. I heard him on a podcast a couple of weeks ago chatting about how much he loves this particular record, and I think one of the phrases he used was, "I could sing every note of it." We're not going to put that to the test, but I thought it'd be really cool to have him on. So we are going to have a chat about Bela Fleck's Drive album. Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. So nice to be here. I love your podcast. I've been on it, but I also listened to it, and it's wonderful, and you're excellent, and you very much deserve all the successes that you've had with it. I've been so happy to see that.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's us done. On to the next episode. I'm British, so I don't do compliments very well. Thank you very much.
My last name's Eldridge, so it's like I get it. I'm right there with you.
I'm really excited to talk about this record because it's a record that I know, and I had an idle thought last year that I would try and pull something together to celebrate it because it was 35 years old last year, and Drive at 35 is just too good a rhyme to pass up. And I reached out to Bela through his people, and Bela is obviously one of the busiest human beings on the planet, and he had around over 2 records out and an endless tour for Poplar. No, it didn't happen. But so I'm really, really pleased to have this chance to chat about it because it's like any level we want to talk about it on kind of works. Like a personal level, it's an important record. It fits right in a thread of instrumental string band music that stretches back to sort of Grisman and through Tony Rice and some of Jerry's records and on through Strength in Numbers and on and on. It's like it's part of a rich tapestry of string band music. And I guess the simple question is, when did you first sort of fall in love with this record?
The first time I ever heard Drive, Lou Reed from the Seldom Scene, Bluegrass Lou Reed, Lou Reed Pirtle, played that record for me when I was probably, maybe 12 or 13 years old. So at this point, I had, in my own journey, I grew up in a musical household. I'd kind of fallen in love with electric guitar when I was, 10 or 11 or so. I was really into that world, into Eric Johnson. That was my guy. But I love the Allman Brothers, all this stuff, all this electric guitar music. But I started getting into more sophisticated music, like harmonically sophisticated music. And the bluegrass, the kind of string band stuff that had some more harmonic sophistication started creeping in, like the David Grisman Quintet. And my mom, we grew up listening to tons of Tony Rice music. So it was kind of like right around this pivotal time where I was, I don't even think I'd gotten into the Flecktones yet. I think this was pre-Flecktones, which was a kind of early phase that in my mind, and maybe that kind of coincided with me getting into Tony, I don't know. But Lou Reed played this record for me right when I was kind of getting into it. He taught me fish scale on the guitar. And so Lou'd kind of become my, he would show me cool things because he could tell I liked that kind of stuff. And we were riding up to the Gettysburg Bluegrass Festival. Lou was staying at the house in Virginia, and he lived in North Carolina at the time. And we were driving up to the Gettysburg Festival, and he said, you know what, you need to hear this. You got to hear this one Tony Rice solo. And he put on the guitar solo from The Legend. He just played that track, The Legend, which is one of the most delightful. That's one of my favorite Tony Rice solos ever. I mean, it kind of just is cruising. It kind of just glides and it's cruising and it's sort of unhinged. It's that, the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And it ends with this cool thing where he slides these fourths up 2 frets. And I just was like, wow, that's really cool. And we listened to the rest of the record kind of after that. And I just remember thinking like, my God, this is amazing music. And there was so much energy. It's like a power plant, like a bluegrass power plant of music on that record. So anyway, that's when I was kind of introduced to it. And as I kind of kept along on my journey, like that was always a fun one to come back to. I think I didn't actually own it myself. I don't think I actually bought it until a couple of years later. Like I didn't get like super deep into it. Yeah, that's definitely when I first heard it. I mean, I remember it very clearly. We also, actually, this is funny. We literally got pulled over by a state trooper on the highway while we were listening to that because Lou was speeding because the music was just so awesome. I don't think he'd necessarily been speeding. I don't know, but that was certainly his excuse to the police officer, and the cop let us go, which was nice.
And I heard you say on a podcast I heard you on recently was that you, as the Stringdusters, covered that entire record for a Halloween show.
We didn't cover the whole thing. That was the initial goal, was to cover the whole thing. We thought we would do that, but no, we only wound up doing maybe like the first 3 or 4 songs. Maybe it was the first 3 songs. And the idea was we were all going to play the solos note for note. This is early days of the Stringdusters. I'm pretty sure that was Halloween 2006. And yeah, we all got dressed up as those guys, except for, Pandolfi had the headband, the Bela Fleck, headband, and we all looked ridiculous. But Travis, instead of dressing up like Mark Schatz, was dressed up as Kenny Rogers, which that was just kind of out of the blue. But regardless, we played those first few songs, and it was fun. I think it was going to take more effort for everybody than it seemed like it should have. So we didn't actually wind up doing the whole record. But it was really fun, and it was a great idea, and it was just fun to sell. Like, I don't think we nailed it. I mean, I don't think it probably sounded that great. I mean, it probably sounded okay, but it was just a great. It was really fun to have that record as such a centerpiece that we all grew up on and all loved so much. And to kind of pay homage to it. It was such a no-brainer. Like, oh yeah, well, let's play these songs note for note. Like, it was just really something that we all loved. And then when I joined the other bands, that like Punch Brothers, when we first got together, it was like Drive was also just really kind of core. That was kind of a core piece of shared. That was just one of those records we really loved. And as a matter of fact, when Thiele wrote "Watch That Breakdown," which was the first track on "How to Grow a Woman from the Ground," which to us is kind of feels like the first Punch Brothers record, even though it came out under Chris's name. He very explicitly told us like he was referencing Whitewater. He said Whitewater, he felt like Whitewater is just like such an incredible first track. So he wanted to basically write his version of Whitewater. And so that's kind of what Watch That Breakdown is very much referencing is Whitewater, even if it doesn't necessarily sound the same. I mean, I guess they're in the same key sort of, but yeah, it was a real touchstone for all of us.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that thread of like bluegrass is bluegrass, and bluegrass contains many like instrumentals, many songs, all of this stuff. But there's a thread of original instrumental progressive string band music that very much sits as part of that. Bands like Punch Brothers Punch Brothers don't tend to do instrumental records per se, but there's always something in the mix somewhere along the way from that first record onwards. And that whole world of acoustic, and it's, I did quite a bit of research for this, and I read some stuff where Bela was talking about having played with Sam and Tony, particularly on Cold on the Shoulder, which Tony had intended to be sort of a Manzanita 2 sort of thing, but that had no banjo on it, and he decided to add some banjo to these tracks. And sort of,
although, by the way, sorry, just an interesting footnote, there was supposed to be banjo on Manzanita.
Yeah,
did you know this?
I read that. Yeah.
Tony told me that one time, and I didn't even believe it. He said, no, J.D. Crowe was set to come play banjo on it, and he got sick. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
that's bad interviewee behavior.
No. But this is all cool stuff. It's all part of the mix, really. And that it sort of Tony had thought, well, Cold on the Shoulder is going to be a bit of a Manzanita 2, but then thought, well, I do want some banjo on it. And Bela had come on. There's sort of a mix, isn't there, on Cold on the Shoulder? And there's this one band that is on that is part of the record, which is Bela and Sam and Jerry and Vassar plays the fiddle. And Bela talks about that experience of particularly of finding like a rhythm section with Tony and Sam and thinking, this is incredible. I'd love to get this on an all instrumental record and see where we could go with that. And there is something about, like, I'm particularly obsessed with that line of instrumental string band music at the moment, and just all the places it goes. It's not like one continuous line, but there's definitely between this record and then Strength in Numbers and maybe a little bit of stuff that comes before it. It's like, it feels like such a key milestone in that tradition to me.
Absolutely. Well, I think what's so significant about Drive, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that that's the first one where you had a composer of Bela's ability, writing interesting tunes. Well, I shouldn't say the first one. The Grisman stuff is great too, but Bela's thing is different. It's more structural in a way, I think. And Bela has this. He's definitely has kind of a, I think, a 10,000 foot perspective on the music compositionally, and all the, he's just a really good composer. It's not just that he writes like great melodies and stuff. He's a really good composer. And so I think, to me, what's notable about Drive is that is the first time where you had a band that could play with that kind of bluegrass energy and that kind of bluegrass timing, because there's a really magical thing about Sam and Tony and Bela, and putting a banjo in there too, like having this subdivision of the banjo with Sam and Tony. That's a really magical thing. And Schatz, who's just like so incredible and has, Schatz has a really particular time feel. He's a utterly identifiable bass player. You wouldn't really mistake him for Todd Phillips or, any of the other greats of that era. You put them all together, and it's this really, really incredible, it's this really incredible time feel, but the tunes and the architecture of the tunes, I think, is really slick as well. And that to me is like the first time you had those things really coming together like that. It's interesting. It's interesting on a bunch of different levels. Like you could kind of put the tune aside. And also, I think the other thing that happens is that they just sound excited to be playing together. I mean, especially on Whitewater. You put that, there are other tracks on the record where it sounds like, okay, they've gotten used to it and they're settled in and they're playing very kind of coherently. Not that the other stuff is incoherent. That's not what I mean, but that like where it was just all super settled and gelled. And like Down in the Swamp, for instance, has that vibe, and Sanctuary has that vibe for most of the song. Um, but you think about just the way Whitewater is. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the first track they cut for the record. And I think if I'm also not mistaken, I think that take was the first take that they cut. I don't even think it was meant to be a take. I think they were getting sounds. And so you kind of, it just has this wild energy. It's just explosive. And Tony's playing all this crazy playful sort of I call it antagonistic, but that's, I could learn a better word, but like where he'll play a chord that's they're an A, right? And Tony will be playing this like C6-9 chord. The rest of the band's going dun, 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 dun. Tony's playing this like kind of weird dotted or triplet, whatever it is, feel across it. It's like they're all just getting in there. It's like they're poking each other. And there's this real excitement to that. There's this real kind of beautiful excitement to that. I mean, it's just electricity. It's just the sound of electricity. And I think that feel, that the vibe of them kind of all really playing together and being playful and pushing each other and reacting to each other. Those guys always did that. I mean, you hear it on all the records where you put them together. I mean, that should happen with any great musicians, but like, and it does happen with all great musicians, but I don't know, somehow it just seems there's a magical thing that happens when you have that crew. And especially now that we have like the things that came after, we have the benefit of like historical hindsight. You can hear more of that stuff, and you can hear live tapes where they played together, hear the bluegrass sessions. It's like all that stuff is pretty special and pretty cool. So I feel like for that, Whitewater is this kind of amazing, thesis statement where it's just like the tune is so simple, but they're just doing the thing. It's like, oh, you're a 900-pound gorilla, and you're a 900-pound gorilla, and you're a 900-pound gorilla, and you're a 900. But guess what? I'm a 950-pound gorilla, and it's like they're all doing that. It's amazing.
And I love it because exactly what you just said, and what you said about Watch Out Breakdown as well. I love a record that starts with an intent, like a statement of intent. A record that sort of starts with, like, we're going to take you somewhere. And it happens in all sorts of genres. Like, I think it's true on Punch. I think Punch Bowl kind of sets the scene. But like, I don't know, something like Counting Crows, August, and everything after that starts around here, and this sort of fade in, a bit of feedback, and this little, like anything that sets the scene and sort of opens your ears for you a little bit. And I read the same thing, that this was the first take, and that it had sped up a bit, and Bela was like, let's do some more. And about take 4 or 5, apparently Tony just said, should we just go back and listen to take 1? And they were all like, right. There you go, that's the take.
Yeah, totally.
And I hadn't realised, because you're talking about this live recordings out there, and I went and listened to some, I think they were billed as the Acoustic All-Stars at the Birchmere, right at the beginning of 88, because this was recorded like the last few days of 87. So January 88, before the record had come out, but they'd obviously recorded these tracks. And Whitewater is introduced, I think, by Stuart Duncan as being called Lawnmower. So it was called Lawnmower before.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, it's an equally good name for that tune.
It's a totally good name. Yeah. I mean, it's whatever it is, it's, there's destruction involved. That song is leaving destruction in its wake. Yeah. Go on. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, maybe Whitewater has slightly more element of taking you on a journey than Lawnmower does, or at least a journey you might want to go on.
Yeah. Well, and it really is a journey. I mean, it really, yeah, it actually, I mean, it's funny. Like you think about all the solos on that song are so great and so iconic. Stuart's solo on that song is so cool. And like, that's the only time, I don't think Stuart would have played that if he thought it was a real take, you know? But it's like, it's this really iconic Stuart Duncan solo that's so cool. That you've just never heard before. Nobody's heard a solo quite like that before. There's some cool stuff. I think on this record too. I listened to it in advance of us talking, and there's some really amazing. How should I say this? Like I just noticed listening to Mark and Stuart, Mark O'Connor and Stuart, the way the kind of reserve with which they played some stuff on fiddle. Like there's this. I listen to Mark's solo on Sanctuary. Like I think if you say Mark O'Connor his solo on Sanctuary, younger me would have immediately gone to like the end, like the big blow ups, solo in the outro where he starts doing all these crazy, these like fast triplets and just playing all this crazy stuff. But his first solo on that song is so cool in terms of how understated it is and how like how's it start? He's got these really small, slow motifs that aren't kind of based in any muscle memory or of his body kind of getting into motion. I mean, it just feels all so intentional. Every note that he plays feels so intentional, so settled, and it just it's just such a masterclass in mastery, of not needing to kind of just show off or I hate when people say showing off but like, it just feels really, what am I trying to say? I kind of know it intuitively, but I'm having a hard time putting it into words. I don't know. Just everybody's so powerful on this record, and I feel like their power kind of manifests in surprising, subtle ways. It's not just that they're banging you over the head with it the way they are on Whitewater. Like there's some beautiful moments of subtlety from everybody that kind of step away from being so bluegrassy. It's interesting. Tony's kind of the one guy who doesn't really do that much on this record, other than Tony affects the music so much. I think on Down in the Swamp in particular, I don't know, there's some others, but Down in the Swamp, Sanctuary, there's one or two others where he's like way more in the band, but there are other ones like The Lights of Home, which is ostensibly the ballad. That's like the pretty song. But Tony is he never lets up with like making interjections the whole time. And he's pushing it real hard on the guitar the whole time. It's doing those arpeggiated single note things. But they all kind of just have these amazing moments in the foreground and in the background. It's one of the best records to listen to interplay on and listen to what the person, like, of course, listen to the soloists. These are some of the best soloists ever, but it's also, this record really bears repeated listening to just like follow a thread on an individual musician, like throughout the song. Just hear what they do through the whole song, or notice how they're bouncing off of other people. There are all kinds of little gems to be found within, if you do that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because listening to it, and you're talking about listening to slightly more harmonically kind of interesting music, and you listen to the Bela stuff that came after this, and this is relatively straightforward in a way. And he's talked about that a bit, about he knew it was going to be the last record that he did for Rounder, and he wanted to write some tunes that maybe not quite so dense to leave space for the band to really shine. There was like an intent to do that. And it sort of feels like that, doesn't it? Although tracks aren't like straightforward, they're also not completely cluttered either. There's definitely space for each of them to find things, and there's bits where they come together and bits where they're doing their own things, but it doesn't feel like there's too much going on all the time. We'll be right back with you just after this. Collings Guitars has been a long-time supporter of the bluegrass community, from collaborating with artists to sponsoring festivals big and small, and now by sponsoring Bluegrass Jam Along. Handmade in Austin, Texas, every Collings guitar and mandolin that leaves the shop is built from the sound up, and the team loves seeing a Collings in the hands of players of all levels, from local musicians to world-renowned pickers. Visit collingsguitars.com for more. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. With 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music, Peghead Nation has something for every picker. You'll learn the tunes and techniques you need to join in at jams and play the music you love, plus advanced techniques like improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 per month, and you can add more for $10 a month. Sign up for any course and get your first month free with the promo code JAMALONG, all one word. Join thousands of other players, including me, who are advancing on their instruments and having more fun playing the roots music they love at pegheadnation.com.
I feel like Bela was, he was so wise. One of the things that makes Bela great as a musician is that he is good, I think, at working with the musicians who he's got. It's one of the things people used to say about Duke Ellington, is that he was really good at that. He didn't necessarily write the thing that he thought would be the most incredible thing in the world. He wrote the thing that he thought the musicians who were going to be rendering the music could just absolutely slay. And therefore the music was better than if he'd gone, for the, shooting the moon in the kind of imaginary, this is not the real world. And I think Bela is really good at kind of recognizing what people are good at as well. And I think he did leave a lot of room in this record. I think he was composing in broad strokes. I think there are kind of big picture moves that are really cool, really interesting. But yeah, there's not a lot of minutia. I mean, if you think about, Sanctuary has kind of a lot of minutia in the structure of the song, but that's kind of the only one that's that way to my mind. I mean, there are others where they're kind of big picture changes. Like what's here, let me just pull up the track list, so I'll refresh my mind as to what these are called. Natchez Trace, right? That's the one at the end where it's like, dun. That's Natchez Trace. At the end of it, he has this really cool way that he takes some of the melodic music that's already been happening, and just kind of recontextualizes it, puts a new chord under it. The whole band opens up for a second, but it's just like, that's this really big picture. It's a really broad stroke that is so welcome in the song at that point. It has such a good, strong effect. But it's just not minutiae. There's so little minutia, and even what is it? The one with Stuart and Mark, Up and Around the Bend.
Yeah.
That one. There's so little minutia even on that between the two fiddles. One guy plays very, they land on that long note. The other guy starts playing on that long note and plays the next phrase and lands on a long note. The other guy. I mean, that is so not actually that intricate. I just think Bela was really smart on this record and realizing that big strokes were going to allow everybody to be the best versions of themselves. And yet the music is interesting. And yet the music, they're not just fiddle tunes. It's not just, okay, here play 2 A parts, 2 B parts, and just repeat that till the end. Like the tunes themselves, the structures themselves do tend to develop. And I think it makes the music more interesting. I think that's that extra, icing on top that actually makes this record extra special.
Well, it's interesting because Jerry had a record like a couple of years before this called Everything's Going to Work Out Fine, which Mark Schatz is on, Sam's on it, Tony's on it. And it's a bunch of some traditional tunes, but a lot of like brilliant tunes of Jerry's that I love, like Tennessee Fluxido and Seabiscuit and other stuff. And they are sort of largely a tune played like a tune, and people improvise over it and play, and it's such a cool record. But the change between that and something like this, like you talked about Bela sort of composing and this being like almost a first for this in the bluegrass world.
Yeah.
There are, it's like you're saying, Up and Around the Bend. It's such a joyful track, Up and Around the Bend. It might be the single most joyful piece of string band music that I know. It just sort of makes my heart stand on tiptoe. It's just, it's beautiful. But there's this lovely bit at the end when they just stretch that phrase in the B section.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you've heard that over and over, and it's like, and you know where you are, and it's not a big thing, but it just adds breath and a point of sound. It's such a genius move that's so simple, but just elevates it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that, that stuff exists throughout the record. It's all over this record. And I think that, they do, those moments do elevate it. And I think it gives the music a sense of gravitas. I just imagine being one of the musicians in there and just kind of seeing how kind of cleverly these tunes are assembled, and just kind of feeling like, I really want to do a good job on this. I want to do a good job because all my buddies are here and they're all 900-pound gorillas too. But also the tunes, I just think there's a sense of gravitas to these tunes, even as simple as they are in a lot of ways. I think I can just imagine being in that room and just kind of see, when you start to see what he actually had in mind. Who knows? I mean, maybe he arranged all these on the spot, but knowing Bela, I can sort of imagine it could have gone both ways, because I haven't been around Bela working with him much, but a little bit, and he has great ideas on the fly, but I think he also prepares a lot. Either way, like for everybody else, when that moment of kind of realizing what he's thinking about, when that kind of hits you, that's a real moment as a musician. I mean, I can relate to that in the music I've made over the years, when somebody has an idea and you finally kind of click into what they're talking about, and all of a sudden there's like this shared vision of what something could be that's beyond. I feel like if you're just playing a tune that's like A parts and B parts and maybe an occasional C part, to me, there's like a different headspace that you occupy, where you kind of get into the campfire. It's like campfire headspace. Like, I'm going to take a cool solo. I'm going to try and listen, but I think if you have development to a tune, I think it causes you to kind of zoom your perspective up a little bit. You're not just going to be sitting in your chair. You're going to try and zoom up to 10,000 feet a little bit yourself as well. And I think it can give songs shape. I think if everybody kind of has that same sense of what these other cool moments are, then everybody intuitively, I think, will kind of start to know the shape of the tune. And intuitively start to build the tune into that shape. Does that make any sense? As opposed to it just being sort of this flatline thing where you're doing the best you can at every moment, but it's sort of not going anywhere. I think these tunes go somewhere.
Yeah, and it's like we talked about Whitewater earlier on, about like feeling like a journey through the record, but also each tune, it doesn't just go, here we are, off we go.
Yeah.
And there's like there's Down in the Swamp, which Bela talks about as being like an attempt at doing the Irish music way of playing a tune, where you're not taking a load of solos, you're just concentrating on groove and melody and largely just playing the tune. And there's a lovely bit towards the end where it breaks down and like the fiddle plays, then the mandolin comes in, then the banjo comes in, then the guitar, and they sort of take it down and build it back up again. Which is, again, such a simple idea, but it just lets you hear the tune. When you've been listening to the same tune for 3 minutes or whatever, it lets you just hear it again and gives, like you're talking about as a musician, zooming out and seeing it from above. And it's just, when fiddle tunes are fairly simple, something that just lets you hear it new partway through is a really welcome thing to the ear. And it gives you a deeper listening experience, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just the idea of big, simple gestures go a long way. And that's, that's a really big, simple gesture. Yeah. I mean, they come in and finally the next section hits and the guitar and bass kind of just slam in, and it's so satisfying. Um, but yeah, totally.
And there's so many of those moments on here, and I find it really interesting that Bela sort of talks about the record as if, like, he described it as in an interview I heard as a very safe record to make. He said, I thought I was maybe copping out a little bit, but then he said a lot of times that happens. People do something, and because they're not trying to be so cutting edge, they're so in their comfort zone, they're really able to be themselves. And I think that maybe ties into what you were saying about picking the musicians and letting them do that. There's something about, and Jerry mentioned a similar thing, saying it just felt so natural. And by the time they came back to make Bluegrass Sessions, it was a bit more of a sense of, well, this is what we do. But it was so new for them at that point to sit as a bunch of people and play that kind of music together instrumentally. Like, it was new to them as well. And it sounds so fresh.
I'd be curious what the timeline was. I don't actually know this. Do you know when Strength in Numbers happened relative to Drive?
So it was released after.
It's a lot of the same people.
Yeah, it came out, but not Tony. There's guitar on that record, but there's not a guitarist, is there?
Mark O'Connor plays guitar on it. Well, actually, no, Bela plays guitar on One Winter's Night on that record too. But yeah, there's guitar on the record. But you have Edgar, who has, Edgar's like, I think the one who was teaching, I think Bela learned a lot of that 10,000, 30,000 foot perspective from hanging out with Edgar, because they started hanging together in the 80s. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, because that's such a different kind of record. Most of the same folks as Drive, but with a very huge, to trade Edgar for Tony. And then you have Mark instead of Stuart.
Also, the composition was very different on that record. So each track was written by like a pairing of two of them, wasn't it? They all had to write a track as a pairing of two.
That's right. Each track was a pairing of two. But the music on that record seems so. It was written differently. Everybody wrote everything. Everybody was involved. In writing the tunes on that record in the pairings, but it's like the way everybody has parts on that record. That's such an elegantly arranged record. It's such an elegantly constructed record. It's so I guess I'm curious if that came out, like if they did that first, or if Bela was thinking about these things at that time. I'm sure this one would seem just so thrown up against the wall, compared to playing these like very specific parts where everybody kind of had their parts worked out, basically. I mean, there's solos and there are some moments for interjection on Strength in Numbers, but it's very, very, very different than on Drive.
Yeah, it feels like that is sort of paving the way for like Uncommon Ritual and like Appalachia Waltz and those kinds of records that are a bit more composed and a bit more chamber.
Yeah, well, and definitely for Punch Brothers too. Punch Brothers is a very arrangey band.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure.
So that Strength in Numbers, I'm pretty sure, came out in 89. And Drive came out in 88. So
gotcha.
Unless the timeline was very skewed, it would have been recorded afterwards. And it's very interesting to think about what space there would have been for a player like Tony on that record. Because, again, like various members of the band on Drive talk about Tony and his approach to preparation being different from theirs. Like, and not necessarily putting a huge amount of effort into learning the tunes. To the extent that a couple of the tracks that have got sort of fairly atmospheric openings, I think this might have been Mark Schatz that said this, but it might be me misremembering something. But one of them said Bailey just knew that like what Tony's strength was, if he hadn't done all the prep everybody else had, he'd get the tune and he'd beat, but let him kind of explore something a bit. And there's a couple of tracks that have a kind of really atmospheric, like Tony-esque opening to them. And that like, wherever I've misremembered that from or not, that makes total sense to me. Of just letting him set a stage,
Yeah. Well, another thing that I remember, I heard, I think it was on maybe another podcast or something about this record, but them saying that they would be ready to do takes, and Tony, they'd be like, "Wait, where's Tony?" And Tony would be sitting out in his car smoking, listening to Miles or Coltrane, whatever, whoever he was listening to.
Yeah.
And everybody else was kind of ready to go, like clock's ticking. Come on, let's get going. We got work to do. And Tony just wasn't like that. And that's one of the things that's cool about Tony. I think it was probably a pain in the ass to work with, in some ways, if you were ready to go. But Tony was also just so, he was keyed into something else. He was keyed into this other side of what made music great. Sort of like inspiration side. And I think he knew how to get there. I think he knew how to create the conditions for that stuff to emerge, for the magic to emerge. And that's why he's so revered, is that there's so much magic. The stuff that he was involved in over the years has so much magic in it. He's got like the highest batting percentage of anybody for magic, as far as I'm concerned, on records. If he's like a baseball player, whatever that statistic would be, Tony Rice would have the highest percentage of anybody of all time, and certainly in our world.
Yeah, and like the Bluegrass Top Trumps pack, if magic was a thing, he'd be like 100.
Yeah, he would be. He'd definitely be in. He'd be in first place. Like the Bluegrass nerds would all know that. And so I think there was something. But I think there was an element of chaos, that kind of came with that as well. But yeah, I remember hearing somebody talk about, maybe it was Jerry or somebody talking about how he was just kind of, it's like they're ready to go, and he was just MIA, and he was just out there kind of getting himself into his zone, and he was not gonna go until he was ready.
It was something Bela said that was from Tim Stafford and Caroline Wright's book still inside about Tony. And Bela was saying it was always a bit difficult about rehearsing, which I found curious, because everybody I knew with a difficult session coming up would want to be prepared. Somehow I got Tony to agree to let me show him some tunes in his hotel room. He got them so fast it was almost unnecessary. When the actual session came, we were all there, but no Tony. Sam went to the hotel and got him. When he walked into the room, it was time to play. Maybe you'd wait for him, but when he sat down in front of the mic, you were going for it. And and Bela's talked so much about how key Tony was to him making that kind of music. Like he said he was the magic in that music, the way his guitar danced and made us all feel. And that sense he talked about really strongly when he came to make My Bluegrass Heart, that almost the driving force was having to realize he couldn't make that record with Tony. He had to find another way of doing it. And it feels like like the role that Tony plays in that record and Bluegrass Sessions as well has its own sort of place in amongst all of the brilliance of all of it. But there's something about how Tony made Bela feel when he played that is like feels incredibly special to hear people talk about.
Yeah, well, all banjo players, well, I think everybody felt that way, but I think banjo players especially, my father talked about playing with Tony as being the same way. He just said it was so easy. He just said it was the easiest thing. He said it was never easier. You could just do anything when you're playing with Tony. It's really cool. Something to shoot for.
And one other thing that I heard in those some interviews or the things I read was Jerry Douglas talking about that experience. And he was going through an incredibly hard time, and he, going through a divorce and fairly depressed, and wasn't even physically at all of the sessions. He wasn't able to be there for some of it. And I defy you to go through and listen to the ones that he wasn't physically in the room with the rest of them for, because and it feels astonishing. But you listen to some of his playing, and anything I listen to that Jerry plays on, I find myself wondering if any other possible choices exist other than the ones he makes, because they all just seem so perfect. But it's listening to Lights of Home, which is such a vocal tune, and Jerry plays like a singer, and it's like you can't shake this sense that there are words to that song, just nobody's singing them. It's so kind of lyrical.
So lyrical, so evocative, yeah. I mean, Jerry's kind of the other magic agent, like those. He's like the other, those are the two guys. And I didn't know that he wasn't there at the sessions. That's really interesting. I'll next time I listen to the record, I'm going to listen to it with that in mind because that'll probably be interesting to try and notice if that changes how I hear the dynamics of the band. But yeah, I mean, Jerry was just he's so lyrical on that, and that was just a time that he was. They were all just so powerful. I mean, it's amazing. I was listening to it today. I just noticed whatever the thing was that I was trying to talk about with Mark O'Connor and on this first solo on Sanctuary that I couldn't find the words for. Jerry displays that on this same record too. There's just it's this certain kind of very self-assured lyricism that's just perfect. It's so sublime and it's so in the moment and it's just beautiful. I mean, just sounds perfect. It just sounds perfect. I don't know how else to say it.
No, and it's come out in like other conversations I've had with other people about his playing on things, because I've interviewed people who's played on their records and stuff, and he just has this ability to play 2 or 3 notes in between a vocal line or a melody, or just, and you go, well, of course that's what you would play. Why would you not play that? Like, but at the same time, they're all choices he makes, and I think you're right. There's just a magic to that.
There's a thing that great musicians do. This is the thing I've said, because I've talked a lot about Tony publicly, but it's the thing I've said about Tony, but I think it's very true for Jerry as well. I think it's true for most great musicians, but especially those guys. And maybe this is part of where that magic comes from. But I think that the intention winds up being somehow they broadcast this intention thing that is almost, as a listener, you're receiving that almost more than what the notes are. Like, he could have played different notes, obviously, and as long as he was in his broadcasting zone, that intention was that clear, we'd be like, yeah, couldn't imagine he could have played anything else. And I feel like that's a thing that's like this mystical thing that a bunch of great musicians have. I had this experience with Trey Stasio. You'd think I'd know how to say his name by now, but the kind of lead singer, guitar player from Fish. And Fish, obviously this massive, band, just plays nothing but arenas and stuff like that. And he came on live from here one time after Thiele took it over. He was on twice, but the first time he came on, we played, and I went to some Fish shows when I was in high school with my buddies, and it was cool, but I was never like a huge Fish fan. And the songs we played on the show were really pretty just simple, like 4-chord kind of rockin' jams. But man, I have to tell you, it was one of the most memorable experiences of my entire musical life. It was up there. It was like definitely top 10 peak musical experiences. And I still don't even really know why, but when I kind of thought about it afterwards, I just was like, because he played great, but a lot of people play great, and he sang great, but a lot of people sing great, and the songs were cool, but a lot of people have cool songs. It was like, if I tried to analyze it, it didn't make sense to me why it was so special, but it was absolutely very special, at least to me. And I wasn't like a huge fan or anything, so I wasn't fanboy, and I just think that what I finally arrived at is like, he just is tapped into there's some kind of like broadcasting of something that isn't just it's not playing in time. It's not, it's not the things that you can kind of transcribe, or that you can, I don't even want to say transcribe. It's not the things that you can analyze readily. It's just, there's this intention. There was just this, he's a powerful being, and he's like this, 5,000 watt, transmitter. And everybody in the room was just on that wavelength. And you can't really explain why it's so great otherwise, but there's just something about it. And I think that that's what you hear in some of these other great musicians, where you say, like, I can't imagine they could have played anything else. It's like, yeah, they could have played other things, but the intention with what with which they do what they're doing, and the commitment to that moment. And it's like that commitment is almost what gets, somehow it's something that transcends just the musical notes on tape. It's this other humanity, this other spirit that gets caught on tape. And I think that's part of what's so cool about older records. That's one of the things that's so cool about Drive, by the way. In particular, is that Drive, you can tell Drive is not all chopped up. Drive is made in an era where there's a thread, there's one long thread that's getting unspooled, which is not to say that things didn't get punched here and there, or there weren't probably some edits. I'm sure there were, but like it was a time of when you recorded on tape. These days with Pro Tools, you can just chop everything up to get all the most perfect bits. And it's a really dangerous thing. People do that a lot, almost always to the music's detriment. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's not actually true. But it can, I think you have to be careful, and it can often be to the music's detriment. And you can fix things as well. And that can be nice. But I think one of the cool things about Drive is, piggybacking on this little tangent that we just went on in terms of intention, is that you just have that human spirit is just continuous. You hear these people weaving through the songs, and it's like when there are a bunch of edits in the music, or if people aren't really committed to what they're doing, if they're not actually really committed to that moment, then that thing, that wavelength, that broadcast that you receive, it's weaker, and the music itself is just way weaker. And it goes into that realm of, there's not really a good word for it other than intention, maybe, or magic. But I think that is one of the most salient parts of what makes the music that we love the most great. And Drive has it in spades.
Yeah, I love that, because like music is essentially communicating, and you don't need to communicate the most complicated thing to resonate with somebody else. You can communicate something incredibly complicated and resonate.
No,
but it's also like live music, and by that I also mean sitting in a studio with a bunch of other people and putting stuff onto a microphone. It's also about channeling energy and like marshalling this energy that each of you is taking from wherever you get your energy from, and however you do that, and kind of trying to put those energies together into one kind of thing. And you're totally right. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but it's what you hear all over this record. It's just it's like you can feel like a collection of energy being really beautifully assembled and then directed.
Yeah, that's right. I think you really can. I mean, it's we haven't really talked much about Sam, but like Sam Bush in this other way is like just a heart. He's just a heartbeat in this other way of this whole music. I mean, the kind of intention with which he plays rhythm. I mean, that's always been one of my favorite things in this music. And it deepens every year for me. As I get, every year older I get, and every year longer I've been in the whole thing, I just marvel at the effect that Sam Bush just chopping has on music. I feel like it should be officially, some people should come together and vote. Some very smart people, and it should be, there's 7 wonders of the world, right? Are there 7?
Let's have an 8.
I think it's time we put number 8 in, Sam Bush. And it's like, it's just miraculous, and you talk about intention. Like you hear his intention in solos and stuff, but I think where Sam's intention really shines so brightly is just in that big, perfect beat that he just supplies for the whole thing. It's like, this, what we were talking about, Strength in Numbers too. I mean, Strength in Numbers, I think even more so, is that record is entirely built around Sam Bush. That rhythm, because it's such an open, spare record, but that Sam's thing. But like on this record, there's a lot more kind of going on at any given moment, a lot more subdivisions, a lot more stuff happening. But man, like the to just hone in on Sam's mandolin playing. And it's interesting because it's not actually totally metronomic. Sam moves, you know. Sam is not. He's not really a human metronome. He sort of is. He's sort of, but he can move. Like I've recorded Sam before, and so I got the fun thing after he left, you know, because I already had these thoughts about Sam. I was like, I can't wait to solo up Sam's tracks. He sounded incredible in the quartet. It was an early. I'll tell you what it was. It was early Haas Cohort Tice. It was before they got Dom in Hawktail, and they were recording that record on Les, and I was recording it at Paul's house. I was engineering it and producing it, and anyway, they got some guests in. They got Future Man came in and played on a couple songs as a fourth member, kind of another rhythmic, and then Sam came in and played on a couple songs. It was really cool. It was really fun hanging with those guys and kind of seeing them from that perspective. Anyway, after Sam left, you know, the tracks sounded great. I soloed up Sam's tracks and they were all over the deck. And, but you put the music back in, put the rest of the band back in, and it sounded like it was the most perfect, you know, thing. And I, you know, this is another thing. I do the same thing with Julian Lage, like the records that Julian and I made together. When I solo me or when I mute me and solo Julian, it sounds like it's all over the place. But you put another foil back in, and it sounds like he is playing the most perfect, beautiful stuff. It's just really, you know, these things go to show you that everything in music is totally relative, that there are no absolutes. But somehow Sam, again, I think it's like we have this perception that it's this perfect thing, because in its way it is this perfect thing. But it's like, but he puts the beat right where you need it to be, right where it actually is supposed to be every time. And it's just that's going back to what I said right when we first started talking about Sam being, you know, he's an element. He's like earth, you know, he's made of rock. It's just it's there. It's absolute. It's incredible.
And you listen to like him playing the melodies on the tracks on something like, there's a point where he doubles the melody at the end of Whitewater, or there's a point where he's playing the melody and Up Around the Bend, and just like the rhythm playing obviously is like huge, but just his approach to like a tune as well. Like you can almost hear, like when you watch Sam play and you see that whole arm moving.
Yeah.
Like you can almost hear it in the single notes. There's just a sort of like I would drive.
Yeah.
Like, you know, to kind of reference the album's title, but I love it. It's so elemental, and like you say, and it's a fascinating mix to listen to, because that thing Tony has that's a bit more mercurial and a bit less
big time
easy to grasp, up against this thing that's all intents and purposes is like, you know, like a sledgehammer of continuity.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, it's not like, and everybody else allows him to play in that way that makes it sound like that.
Yeah.
But the groove, like the groove that Sam has.
The groove is incredible. It's incredible. Well, it's like, yeah. You know, I think an interesting thing with Sam, to go back to like him playing rhythm for a sec. If you watch Sam play, a lot of times he will hinge at his hips. So it's like the whole upper half of his body is moving. You know, some people will keep the rhythm, you know, in their hand. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, if you have a flat pick, right? Or maybe it's like there's a slightly bigger one in your arm or your shoulder. But Sam, when he's playing rhythm, he'll go like forward, back, forward. It's like you could have played a whole bunch of subdivisions within that little spot. Or his head kind of goes up and down. But he's really tied into that big beat. And, you know, sometimes I wonder how much of that he played in I asked him about this one time. And I was like, what is it? How do you do your rhythmic thing? Like, what is it? He said, I don't really know, but one of the things is, he said, I played in a drum line, you know, when he was in high school. He was like in a marching band, you know, so I think he had the rudiments and the fundamentals are just so well understood. he's got that stuff so dialed. But then the other thing is that he's a fiddler, and like the way fiddlers do rhythm, there's like, you think about, and if you picture Sam playing the fiddle, like he takes these long, fast bow strokes a lot of times, but he's not going back and forth on the bow that much usually. He's kind of like getting a lot of, the way most people play fiddle. But he's so rhythmically awesome as a fiddler too. It's just such a different mechanism than playing with a flat pick, where it really usually is like down, up, down, up, down, or down, or down. The fiddle thing is kind of this big thing. So I think maybe part of the magic is that he feels a bigger beat than most of the rest of us feel, when we're getting in there. But that's part of the magic too. You got Bela, and I think Bela, obviously can feel lots of gradations of beat, but he's a banjo player. Banjo players play 16th notes. Like that's at its most core form. That's how the banjo works. So it's like you put all these different people together who are such good musicians. Schatz has kind of a, just bum bum. That's kind of, it's rare that he plays things different than that, or dum bum ba dum bum bum. Maybe he'll do, some of those quicker guys every now and then, but everybody kind of lives, I think, maybe in their own rhythmic realm a little bit, and the way it all adds up is really beautiful.
Yeah, just that kind of collection of things coming together to make a new thing, and it's really interesting. Like just hearing you talk about Sam, and we talked a little bit earlier about strength in numbers, and it's easy to think with Sam, because of the kind of jam band element of what he does, the kind of jamgrass thing, and just like that huge chop and all that stuff. But like you say, Strength in Numbers is a very arranged, like elegant in places record. And I just say Sam's totally at the heart of that record. And he has, I think people, maybe not, maybe me, maybe talking about me here, maybe I forget that he has that side of his playing as well. He's totally able to do all of it. It's not. Yeah, I think it's easy to associate some people with certain things sometimes, and because he's got this, 50-year span of doing stuff with a more sort of jammed element to it. But Strength in Numbers is such a kind of fashioned record. Yeah,
it is. Well, and Short Trip Home, the other record with Edgar and Mike Marshall and Josh Bell. I mean, he can kind of do it all. But I think the thing that probably ties it together, he's just all these guys we're talking about. They're all just obviously true master musicians, so it's on top of that. But I think there's just this level of intention. Like I think as we're talking and I'm kind of putting it together in my mind, I mean, I think the thing that all of these guys have that's just so strong is just clear. There's just powerful intention. I think that's what makes everybody so good. Like Bela has a vision, it's like Bela is the guy who can have this vision and kind of figure out how to bring it into being. And that's like a rare, powerful talent. And he's also just so brilliant in all these other myriad ways as a musician. But, he kind of, has this incredible overview and he created this amazing space for all these other really powerful musicians to kind of thrive in their best way. But what I kind of, as we're talking, is what I just think about all of them is just the intention is so clear. I mean, Stuart and Mark, I mean, obviously can't get more lucid playing than that. I mean, that's as lucid as it gets, both those guys. I mean, they're different kinds of musicians, but they're both kind of as lucid as you can play. It's really remarkable.
And it's interesting that, the Strength in Numbers not long after, but then Bela essentially, that's when the Fleck tones start really after that. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't come back to, recording in this format for quite some time.
Yeah.
It's, it's over a decade later before you get the sort of bluegrass sessions, and it's easy to like project back and listen to it and just go, well, like how could we possibly top that? You know, it's such a complete statement of a thing, and it's hard for me because I listen to it with the context of hearing what's come since, and to imagine hearing that like 1988, pop in your cassette player or whatever, and that comes out, and you know, it's an extraordinary record from all the levels we've talked about it, from where it sits in the sort of the canon of string band music to where it sits in the discographies of all the people on it, and just how, like, if somebody gave it to you and you'd never heard it and you put it on today, you could believe it was recorded yesterday.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, it's of a time because of where it fits, but it's just, I mean, you know, such a complete statement of a record for me.
Yeah, it's remarkable. But it is cool, you know, like the Bluegrass Sessions is also one of my very favorite. That's one of my very favorite records in this wider, not just the Bela canon, but just the wider string band music canon. I mean, I love that record, and that record's interesting because I think you know, you got all those guys. It's got a different feel to it because I think it's a lot more edited. But so it feels a little bit different, but I think the writing is, I think Bela kind of felt like, all right, we can take some bigger swings. I don't have to be quite, these don't have to be the and when I say big swings, I'm talking about like a baseball player taking a big swing. I think he didn't feel like he needed to paint in such broad strokes. There's a lot more just cool arrangement-y stuff. The tunes are more complex on that record. There's color. There's just so much color on that record. And I think it actually matched up with where a lot of those guys were. I mean, especially Tony, you know, I mean, I see most of this because I'm such a guitar player and such a student of Tony's. Like I see a lot of it through the prism of Tony first. There may be Bela, but you know, that was the Bluegrass Sessions. Tony lost his ability to sing at that point, and he'd kind of found this other way to be colorful himself. He'd like really recommitted himself to playing guitar, and like he played some incredible stuff in like the late '90s. I don't know if you ever heard that record. It's Rice Hillman Peterson, but it's not it's the first one they did. I think it's called Out of the Woodwork.
Yeah.
Do you know that record?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's like the most beautiful Tony Rice guitar playing ever. I mean, it's incredible the stuff he plays on that record. But I think they cut the Bluegrass Sessions around that same time, and Bela was writing with all this. His writing had just kind of gotten that much more mature. But I think he was saying, I think he was probably thinking like, well, we can do more than we did on Drive. And that's just an incredible record too. I used to, when I was in college, I used to teach I went to this place, Oberlin College in Ohio, and there was a thing called Experimental College, EXCOs, where students could teach classes for 1 credit. And so I taught a bluegrass class, and we covered like the whole gamut of bluegrass, you know, from pre-bluegrass up until, you know, the present day. But we did a whole little unit. I guess it was just one week because it was 2 weeks. But anyway, it was just on the Bluegrass Sessions because I loved that record so much. I just thought it was just such a culmination of cool bluegrass music. You know, it still has that drive. It still has the kind of bounce and the drive of real bluegrass and of those guys playing bluegrass, but with a lot more going on. But it's interesting. It has a different feel to it, I think, because of how they recorded it, which was playing each song a bunch of times and then editing together the best parts. It hasn't done anything to affect how much I love that record. I think it's still totally great, but it's a different kind of, I hear it as a different kind of listen.
It's funny, I don't know Bela at all, but just the way people talk about him, the two things that I come away with are Bela likes to rehearse and Bela likes to edit.
Yeah.
You know, there's the two things I hear over and over again. There's a wonderful...
He's real good at both of those things.
Bill Amatnik, who played bass with the Grissman Quintet in the 70s, wrote a book about Tony recently, and he spoke to Bela for it. And it's a lovely quote about the Bluegrass sessions in there. That kind of, Bela said, we did that group again on an album called Bluegrass Sessions. The music was more complex. And his comment to me, meaning Tony's, was, too many brains, Bela, too many brains, so many parts. Bela was like, just try it, Tony, just try it. And I love that.
Yeah, he did, and it was great. Bela was right.
And I think that's one of the interesting things that I've sort of taken from this conversation, is that idea that I'd sort of got a sense of it before, but just about Bela making the space for all those people to shine, and finding the things that would, and listening forward to My Bluegrass Heart and all those different bands and those different combinations, and choosing people for things they could do or things he thought they'd be good at, or choosing different people for different things. And it makes so much sense. And it's been a treat getting to talk to you about it. It's, I love these conversations, and there's often something really beautiful talking to somebody about somebody else's music and kind of going deep on a thing. And it's just been a joy. Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. I love getting to talk to you, and I love listening to you talk. So it's nice to be here.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.